So I have my back trimmed up, and I've got it taped to the paper with the straight line booking the center back. So I've trimmed this off nice and neat, drew my straight line and booked my muslin to it. I made my alteration here in the neck, and I raised it up 1/4 inch, making sure to keep this square right here to fill in the back neck. High point shoulder is correct. Now, one thing I didn't do on the front, we'll have to come back and adjust the front neck so that it's compatible to the back. We didn't do that, and we can do it after we finish this because we'll do a true and blending on it and make sure it's accurate. The rest of my pattern, I went ahead and drew a solid line in and then did a dash line on my paper, side seam, and armhole. I've adjusted my dart. Here's my dart as it is, and then I'm going to just lift this up and then draw in my dart correctly on the paper. So everything's been traced off, my waistline, my HBL, and all the extremity lines, including my dart. So I'm just going to slide this out. My neck has been adjusted for the 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to fix my paper pattern. Remember, no seam allowance, because this is a block, and we want to be able to work off of it and make many other styles. So I'm just going to get this out of here, leave the tape on the paper. It's perfectly fine, that way you don't lose your marks. Now, I'm going to come in here with my ruler and my straight edge, and the first thing I'm going to do is get this dart in here properly, because I think my dart might be off just a slight bit at the waist suppression. So if this waist suppression is 1.5 inches, I want to make sure I'm 3/4 on each side of this line. So I'm not quite there. I'm a little bit wider over here than I am on this side. So I'm going to shift the dart points right here. So you want to make sure you're evenly divided on your dart fold line at the waist suppression. So I'm going to draw in my dart legs, just like I did on the front. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind, that this dart point right here stays equal to or slightly lower than this armhole. If it gets up into here, like I talked about before, sometimes it can cause pulling on this back armhole. So it's a good idea to keep this equal to or slightly lower than our back armhole. So right now mine is, just about 3/8 inch lower, maybe a little more, 1/4 inch lower than that armhole. But that's a safe place to keep it, especially when you're just getting started with your block. Now I'm going to draw in my waistline, and I'm going to stay square to center back. It's got a little bit of a curve on it, just slightly, and it curves up on the side. This is very common in the back waist, that it lifts up at the side seam, so that's perfectly fine. Straight line, straight line, straight line. Got my dart in. Let's go ahead and put in our dart punch holes, or dart marks, 1/2 inch away from the actual dart tip. And I like to circle them so I notice them and I don't mark the wrong thing. Okay, so now we're going to get the rest of these curves out of here. We've got our HBL line. So let's start off square back here and see where this line takes us. Well, this line's pretty much straight all the way across the back. The back hip looks like it's pretty consistent. I'm going to come down 2 inches below here and finish this curve off. So let's get our French curve, or our berry curve, and we'll finish the curve off on the back hip. So I'm going to do my waist suppression, flip it over, line up as many dash lines as I can, and finish off the rest of my hip curve. Now, before I cut this out, let's get the armhole here too. So we'll do the armhole. Before I cut this entire back out, I'm going to use the front, and I'm going to go ahead and true and blend, which means I'm going to make all my seams the same length that are sewn to the back and front where they join. And I'm also going to blend them so that there's a smooth transition between any points of contact. So let's go back to the front. We have some things we need to do with the neckline first of all, because I forgot to transfer the information. We need to raise this 3/8 of an inch and make this point come out to match the back shoulder. So the back shoulder right here, see, we have quite a bit we need to add in this area right here. So it's about 1/2 inch that we need to add to this front neck. So I'm going to add 1/2 inch here and raise it 3/8 of an inch here. So let's take care of the neck first. We'll do the dart, and then we'll true and blend our pattern. So to do this front, I just want to take a little bit of paper, and I'm going to take it right off the bottom of here. And I'm just going to insert it into the neckline. and then make my corrections. So I'll just take this down right here. Now, once we sew up our muslin, the final torso muslin, we still might need to make some adjustments. So just because we do all this doesn't mean we're completely done. We may end up having to adjust it one more time after we actually do a sewn muslin. But that's okay. That's the whole process, and that's what makes it perfect. I always like to tape on the back side when I'm taping on extra paper so that the front and back don't come apart over time. I'm going to raise the front neck 3/8 of an inch right here, and I want to fill in the side neck a 1/2 inch. So this is going to be my new neckline on my front. So I want to make sure I'm square right here. And then my neckline is going to just go into here. I give myself a little dotted line, and then I let the berry curve or the French curve do the rest, because it'll fine tune it better than I will if I'm just trying to eye it with my hand and my eye. So you always want to try to use your tools to do a more accurate job of doing curves or any other difficult area. Okay, so now this has been corrected here. We're going to do the dart, and then we're going to true and blend the two together. This is very common, and as I said on the form, that the back neck might be slightly bigger than the front. That keeps it from pulling on your shoulders and making it have drag lines across the back at the armhole, from the shoulder to the armhole, and it keeps it seated. So sometimes the back neck needs to be slightly bigger than the front. Now let's talk about the start. First thing I'm going to do is fold it on the fold line, and then once I have the fold line creased, I'm going to go all the way through the pattern, and I want to hold it to the light and make sure that my two dart legs are on top of each other. That's very important. And then I fold the dart intake on the dart leg in the downward direction, so it's toward the hem like this, and then open it up, keeping the dart folded close like this, and then we're going to blend off the side seam. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm just going to fill in this little area so I have a nice smooth transition. So this is truing and blending the dart. So I'm going to come right along through here and go back to 0 right here. And I keep everything closed, and you can tape it if you want. It makes it a little easier to hang on to. Tape it, and then you're going to cut this off, all this bubble. This is the best way to make a dart contour on your dart intake. That way you know when you sew it back together, you're going to have a nice smooth transition. See, that's very pretty. Then just pop your tape, like that. And then we'll notch right here, and I use a little curved horseshoes to remember to notch my dart. So that's my dart complete. So now we have our dart complete. It's time to walk the back and the front pattern to make sure it's trued and blended. Truing means to make sure the seams that are going to be attached together are the same length. Blending means you have a smooth transition at the ends of the seams, no points or divots. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with the front torso. There's no seam allowance on either of these, and I've held off cutting this one out because I don't want to cut it out until I've trued and blended. That saves me a step. The first thing I'm going to do is take the two shoulder seams, place them together at high point shoulder, and align them to see what needs to be adjusted. Now on this one, the back shoulder is slightly longer. That's how I know I've trued it, by making that mark. Now to blend it, I'm going to put high point shoulder together like this and butt them together and decide whether I'm going to lengthen my front armhole seam or shorten this one. And as you see, if I lengthen the front one, which would be right here, I end up with a little point. That wouldn't be blended because then I would have a point on the outside of my armhole at the shoulder tip. So I've chosen to reduce the back armhole at this point and make a smooth transition here, which is blending. So now with this here and this adjustment here, that means this seam has been trued and blended. Now the side seam over here, I'm going to take my dart and I'm going to refold my underarm dart here at the side seam and put a little temporary tape on it. And I'm going to true this seam by aligning the underarm and walking it down through here on the very edge. Now if you need to hold it with something, use a pin or a pencil and just hold the edge so that you keep the side seams on top of each other. When I get to the waist, this is my back, my front waist, I make a mark where the front waist is, right here. When I come down to here, I have to decide where my HBL is going to be. So my HBL on the front is right here. So I've marked the waist and the HBL from my front to the back. I've also come down and I've marked the very end of this pattern right here. So I know that I need to lengthen the back to fit the front. Now why I let the front dominate the back is because it has more complexities with the two darts. So it's a little more difficult to adjust this than it is the back panel. So I usually favor cutting the front out first, walking it to the back and making the adjustments on the back within reason. Unless I see something really obvious about the front that needs to be adjusted, then I'll change course. So once we have this, I see that my waist needs to be adjusted here. My hip is really pretty much in line here, so I'm going to leave it alone. And then I've lengthened this here to be adjusted to the front length. So I've adjusted the waist in the back, I've lifted it up. I've also taken the dart suppression and lifted it up to be in line with my new waist adjustment here. So that was my adjustment. My waist right here, my hip is pretty much on line, and I needed to lengthen it slightly so that it coordinated with the front. So when I cut this out, I'll be cutting on the small line here. Note the little circles. I circled the correct line so I know the difference. You can squiggle through the wrong line if you want. That also is helpful. But this will be cut out just like the front is. And then I'll cut it all out in muslin, putting a 1/2 inch seam allowance where required, and then sewing it up and putting it on the form. So let's do that, and then I'll take you to that step. So now I have my muslin cut out from my pattern, and I've added a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the shoulder, armhole, side seam. I've left the neckline at 0 and the hemline, or the bottom edge, at 0. The reason I left the neckline at 0, I want to get an accurate fit of this neck, and if I have the seam allowance on it, it's going to distort the lines. But I want to check this, and this is a critical area, so no seam allowance here. The rest of this is just intended so I can put it together and do the successful fitting. On the front edge, I've allowed 1 inch so that I can press this back, and I'll have my center front right along this line. It gives me a chance to put this on a person or myself, if I were doing it for myself, and actually be able to close it up and successfully without having to struggle trying to close the back up. So if you're doing this on you or a person, it might be easier to do the opening on the front. Now on the form it doesn't really matter. I could have opened it in the back and let the front close, so it can vary on this particular situation. Back neck, again, no seam allowance. Shoulder, armhole, side seam, seam allowance, and nothing here. I've marked all the darts and the seam lines on each piece so that I know when I go to sew, I'll be sewing it accurately. You may not need to do that. If you're an experienced seamstress or sewer, you won't need to do that, but it's a good idea if you're just doubting the accuracy to go ahead and do that. Last thing I've done is I've notched my armhole, double notches in the back. This is standard. This symbolizes this is the back armhole. 2 notches 3/8 inch apart. A single notch in the front armhole, that symbolizes that's the front. I've notched my dart legs, my waist, so I put a notch right at the waistline, and the HBL line. That way when I sew this up, I'll know I'm accurate with all my measurements and all my placement of my landmarks. So I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, sew it up, press it, and the next time I see you, we'll have this on the form and we'll check it out. So now we have our muslin sewn up, and it's on the form. A couple things to remember when you're sewing and pressing your muslin. Use a pressing hand so that your darts aren't too sharp on the ends. That'll make the fit a little bit better. I've also pressed under one side of my center front, 1 inch, the margin I left on my muslin, and then pinned it together so I could get a more accurate view of what the front looks like. I'm liking most everything I see. There's a couple of adjustments I want to make, mainly in the waist suppression. I think it might be a little bit full, so I'm going to take a little bit out of the waist suppression without distorting too much of it. So I'll take my pins and I'm just going to pin a little bit here on the waist. I like where the height of the waist suppression is. It's spot on the waist, which I really like that. But I think the side seam could be an 1/8 on the double out of the waist and then back to 0 at the high hip, right in this section right here. So once I get this pin, I'll take a look at that, and then I have one other change I want to make to my final muslin, and then transfer this information to my pattern. And I have successfully made a very nice torso block for my form. So just that little bit out, I can see that contrasting to the other side, it looks a lot better to have that little bit out of there and get a little bit trimmer side on your waist. The other thing I'm seeing is right here at the back neck. I would like to raise it up just a little bit here, about 3/16 of an inch, because it's just a little bit low. I don't want to go all the way to the seam, but more like maybe even a 1/4 inch. I want to fill this in to 0 at the side seams. So what you want to do when you put your muslin on, you want to look for certain areas. You want to make sure your side seam is lining up with the form's side seam, or if you're on a human, if they have pants or a snug fitting top on, make sure that their seams are aligned and adjusted properly. You don't want them swinging forward or back. Look for drag lines. You don't want to see any drag lines, apparent drag lines that might be causing problems. The neck correction I made I really like. It's laying much better now to have a smaller front neck and a slightly larger back neck. The only thing I want to do is fill in that center back neck a 1/4 inch. The armhole drop looks good. I'm liking everything I see. I'm just going to do the waist suppression and the center back neck, and I think I can call it done. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you learn a lot about how to make a torso for someone and not be intimidated by it.